Okay, we are live on the air. This is Flux of FluxWithIt.com. We are here for episode 25 of the Producers Hangout. Today we have a very special guest with us, Rolf, and I'm not going to pronounce his last name because I will screw it up, but he is the wonderful creator behind N-Log Music and has also worked on Nave. He's got a wonderful harpsichord app as well that he's worked on and other numerous projects. I'm going to pass it off to Bryce and let him introduce himself as well, and we'll move right down the line.
Hey guys, Bryce. I'm a producer and synthesizer enthusiast, and I guess that's pretty much it for me. Pass it on over to Mike.
What's up, guys? Mike here with padbangers.com, blogger, hip-hop and electronic music producer from Germany, and I'm very happy to have Rolf Wöhrmann, what is the last name correctly pronounced, here. I'm very glad, so I got a little support from Germany in this show today.
Okay, so what I wanted to dive into first for this show is we're going to get a little bit of history of Rolf and what he's been up to. So first I'd like to dive into the original N-Log iOS synth. Now, Rolf, that was one of the first iOS synths, wasn't it?
Yes. So somebody told her it's already vintage.
That's your vintage software.
Yeah.
So how did the idea for N-Log come about first?
It was very funny because I had some part of the synthesis engine already running on laptop, but it was as a VST, but it was never released. And my wife got an iPhone. So I said, well, my wife got an iPhone. I need an iPhone myself. So I bought one and found out it can do nice DSP. So I tried to port all the algorithms to the iPhone and got it somehow working after a while.
Now, did you find that working on the N-Log synth, did you run up against a lot of ceilings or performance issues while you were working on it, or was it pretty smooth?
Well, you know, that was 2008, 2009. While it was working somehow, it was, of course, a lot of performance issues I had to solve in the beginning. The iPhone, I think it was an iPhone 3G, with the first version coming out, or a 3 or 3G. I'm not exactly sure. Anyway. We had to do a lot of tricks to get it running these times, myself and other app developers, which is much more easier nowadays. So part of the audio engine was coded, for example, directly on the CPU and machine language with hand optimizing stuff, and this is very painful to do, and now the development environment does all the optimization for you. But
so you would say that developing today on the newer products, aside from the more powerful engine or chipsets that you're working with, you're also finding that the developer library is much more robust and much easier to work with as well?
Sure. There was no MIDI in the beginning. There was no core MIDI in the beginning. So, and I'm not sure if you remember that then Line 6 came out with a MIDI mobilizer using not core MIDI but own custom protocols. So, on the other hand, we had these ceilings and these performance issues, but there was a joy and the reward to get it running on these devices. You know, to get a synthesizer running in a decent audio quality, at that small size, this was something exciting at that time. Nobody could imagine that.
Yeah, that was a big deal. I remember when the Mobile In came out, and we were able to just use the breakout cables and get MIDI into our iOS devices. That was a very big deal. And now we're able to do things like I'm running Nave currently right now plugged into a tractor audio interface, and it just works. You know, like there's no setup or anything. It's just send MIDI to it, and you're good to go, and it works just like a piece of hardware.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So Apple did a nice job with all the core MIDI implementation. That works quite stable.
Did you, when you were working on Nlog, did you look at other like hardware or software synths? Like, were there any major inspirations that you kind of wanted to take from and use that, or you know, kind of base the idea around?
Not consciously at the time when I was developing Nlog, but after the fact, I realized, well, maybe a little bit of Prophet 5 inside. I think that would be the strongest influence, but it's not a Prophet 5 copy in any way. So it's
sure.
I think it's maybe the nearest thing.
Can you tell us a little bit about the synthesis engine in Nlog and for instance, the filters? What style filters are you using in there?
So I have the typical setup of 12 and 24 dB filters, and in the beginning I had a different filter. So the first version with Nlog came out with a different filter. It's still available as a kind of a vintage mode, let's say. Mm-hmm. But then I started to tune the filters to my ear. So there's no special mathematical trick in it. And if it's special in any way, it's just because I try to tune the parameters just by my own taste.
Sure. Do you own many analog synthesizers, and you know, were you kind of like comparing to those, or?
Not at that time. So at that time, I was I owned I owned some analog synthesizers when in the 80s and beginning of the 90s, but then I sold them. And when I developed Nlog, I had actually no analog synthesizer with me. But after Nlog, and I spent some money earning from Nlog to buy stuff.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because when you look at the app and when you use the app, it very much, I mean, it screams analog. Like when you look at it, it doesn't scream DX7. It doesn't scream, you know, digital 80s synthesizer, or, you know, anything like that. It definitely, you look at it and you say, okay, well, this is, you know, analog, you know, at the heart, you know?
Yeah.
Right. Yep.
I'm not sure when I was redesigning the filters if I, at that moment, already bought some stuff. So I bought a Mini Moog. I had a Roland 100M modular.
Oh wow!
I had a MS-20, of course, and a Prophet 5. I still have a Prophet 5 revision 2 with the SSM filters.
Wow!
I started to buy the Eurorack, but well, that's all. That stuff is quite expensive. So I started also to sell stuff. So I bought stuff to have it for 2 years or something like this, some vintage stuff, and then sold it again to buy other stuff and so on.
So you would say that that the Prophet 5 was probably your favorite of those, or is that why it sticks around?
Maybe yes, but I don't like the normal Prophet 5 with the Curtis chips. And I had a couple of recent Dave Smiths. I had a Poly Evolver and a Tempest, which are also using the chips based on the Curtis filter. But actually, I like more the older ones, the SSM filters with the older chip generation, which are more juicy. And recently, I'm not sure. I wasn't at NAMM, but with his new Prophet 6, if I'm correctly listened to the interviews, he started to move away from Curtis filters in the Prophet 6 back to something SSM-like. So
that's correct. Yeah, that's basically what I'm gathering from it as well. Is that it's not Curtis, and but he doesn't outright say SSM, I don't believe either, but he does say that it's a new filter design, and if you listen to it, yeah, I can definitely see that to me, to my ears, from what I've heard so far, it sounds more like along the SSM style route,
Yeah.
you know.
So I hope we have here music messe in April, I guess. So that would be an opportunity for me to see it, to listen to it and try it.
Could you see yourself buying one of those over, over some of the other synths that he has out right now?
Maybe yes. I don't know. But I'm waiting for another major brand to release a poly analog synth.
Yeah, I hear you on that.
But who would be the first one?
Well, at this point, it's kind of a race. At this point, it looks like it seems like a lot of people are awful, like right on the cusp of jumping out. So I mean, you could definitely see Moog on the cusp of doing something. I don't think that they'll be doing anything that's memory Moog related. I don't see anything quite that ambitious as far as full on, multiple voiced Voyagers coming out or anything like that. But I could see Moog doing a poly at this point, and I could also see Korg doing a polysynth. And of course then we also know that Behringer is, looking to do it, and they want to use their newly acquired engineers to help out.
Midas, right?
Yeah, the Midas engineers. So that could be interesting. And Roland has got their XA that they're going to be debuting at Music Messe. So, and we don't know 100% about that, but it's starting to sound like that will have poly analog built in.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And Yamaha is celebrating, what did they say, like 40 years of analog synthesis, and they celebrated it by giving the sequential name back to Dave Smith, and didn't announce any synthesizers at NAMM. So it leaves me kind of like, when are they going to throw their hat into the ring of new analog synthesizers? So I'm very much looking forward to that, because I love the old CS10, CS15 sound. I know a lot of people feel like they were a little too clean, but I actually really like that sound. I like that subtle sound.
Yeah, my first analog was a CS5.
Yeah, and see, that's a great synth. Like I just
that was the only thing I was able to buy, or to talk into my parents to buy me a thing.
Yeah, I'm very much hoping to see the CS line kind of make a return. And if they were to do like a modern version of a CS80, the world would go insane.
Yeah,
you'd see people jumping out of buildings to run to Sweetwater.
Definitely.
So it's a very exciting time for analog synthesizers and digital synthesizers. I myself, I love analog synths. I've got quite a few in my setup, and Eurorack. But even with the analog stuff, I'm a big fan of hybrids. So like you were talking about the Poly Evolver. And I'm a big fan of combining analog and digital oscillators. So when I see things like Nave, in all honesty, and I don't say this because you're on the show, but Nave is my favorite iOS app. Out of all the apps that they have out there, it's what I go to more often than anything, and a lot of it is because of the engine inside of it is just so powerful, and you can just manipulate every little thing in it, and the speech synthesis engine in it, the Nave tables. It's wonderful. And then especially when you take that and then you run it through your analog equipment as well, like your analog filters and all, then it's just all hell breaks loose. So can you tell us a little bit about how you got involved with the Nave project?
Well, Waldorf called me, and they wanted to do an iPad synth. And so they heard about my analog stuff and so on. So And they were nice people, so I said yes, why not? And it was not from the beginning not an idea to port anything existing, like make a Blofeld or make a Largo on the iPad. So in the beginning, it was quite quickly clear that we said, okay, let's do a new thing, whatever it is. We had no idea. And then I worked together with Stefan Stenzel, who is the audio guy from Waldorf, and with Axel Hartmann, which is a famous designer. And then we started, and it took, I think, 1.5 years until we had it done.
Wow.
But it took so long because we took the time to get the concept right, you know. And sometimes we got in fight even about how to do it right. But this, I think the result was then quite rewarding. And but after 1.5 years, we started to send out some kind, before beta testing, we sent out some versions to some people, and at a certain moment I was totally unsure if it's totally crap what we are doing, you know. If you for such a long time working with just 2 other people on something, it's like a music production. If you work too long on a production, you get blind in a way.
Yep.
So Axel Hartmann had a contact to Richard Devine, and okay, say, okay, let's try send in a version. And he was very open and friendly. And he came back and said, well, that's great, and blah, 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 blah. And he was really excited about it. And then at that moment, I knew, okay, we didn't waste it 1.5 years. It's a great thing. And this was a good motivation then to start the beta test. And it took another 2 months to get it done. And then there it was.
See, I find when you say 1.5 years and you comment about that taking a long time, I'm actually surprised it got done in such a short amount of time, because it's so well thought out, and it's when you use it, it's, I mean, honestly, the user interface and the depth that's available to you on there is, I mean, at the time that it came out, I can recall that the biggest app out there, synthesis-wise, was Moog's Animoog.
You're right.
And that was, everybody was up in arms about how great it sounded. Well, when Nave came out, my personal opinion was, this blows that away. I mean, I couldn't believe it. I mean, in all honesty, it sounded better to me than most of the VSTs on powerful computers that are out. When you were working on Nave, what was some of the inspirations as far as how you were going to be putting it together?
You mean from the user interface design or from the sound?
Well, more from the synthesis engine as a whole. Like where you decided, like where did the idea start at? You know, at what point did you decide that you were definitely going to be doing a wavetable synth? Was that just because it was Waldorf, or?
Yes, that was clear in the beginning. I think. So the one thing was, it's a wavetable. It builds on the Waldorf and also PPG somehow heritage.
Sure.
And Stefan from Waldorf had some idea how to put the wavetable synthesis a little bit further. So the idea of the spectrum dial and stuff like this, of the speech synthesizer, this comes from Stefan. And this is also the reason that you find these kind of controls also in the NW1 module in the Eurorack.
I had a quick question about Nave as well. The user interface, the layout, the way things are just, you know, where you guys decided to put knobs as far as the way it's laid out, was that a combination of the two minds coming together, or were you mainly behind the user interface, the way everything's laid out, because I can see some clues from Inlog. You know, there's some subtle clues from that, but I was just curious about that because I have PPG also as well as Nave, and I like PPG. It just is not laid out as nice as Nave, and it's not as user friendly. Nave just makes sense to me. So and PPG is really it's more of a, you really have to get in there and really search and dig deep, whereas Nave is it just really makes sense. It flows for me. So if you could just touch on a little bit of that, if you don't mind.
Yes, that's definitely, I think I brought in my experience from iOS, iPads, and Log, you know, and so I knew how to do it on an iPad, and I had the experience. And Axel Hartmann did the wonderful graphics stuff. So he and myself, we built up the thing, and then somehow Stefan from Waldorf came back with some influence, not iPad related, but he brought also in some traditional elements from VST plugins, let's say. So I did some iPad-like thing. Axel made a great design, and then Stefan said, "But you need readouts, you know, and stuff like this." And so this three minds, somehow in the interplay of these three minds, I think we got it right. But definitely the iPad-related flow that comes from my builds on my analog experience.
Nice.
So Axel Hartmann, just to touch on for a second, he's a little bit well known as well for doing the Neuron, the Hartmann Neuron. Is this the same Axel Hartmann that we're talking about?
Yes, and he did the Neuron, and he does industrial design for Moog.
Okay, yeah, that's what I thought.
The Voyager and all the recent Moogs, except for the new modulars, all the recent hardware Moog stuff is from Axel. He does the hardware design for Waldorf, for Arturia, for some things from Arturia. I don't know. He has a nice web page from his industrial design company. He's probably has 30 or 40% of the synth market is designed by him.
That's why I brought that up, is because he has such a there's such a pedigree behind that, and it's, you know, so when we look at, okay, so we've got Axel Hartmann involved, Waldorf involved, we've got you involved, who is, you know, a pioneer in the iOS development of synthesis. I mean, it's kind of you're talking about putting together a team of people that, if you guys had failed, there would have been something really wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of a super team of wonderful designers all coming together. So it's kind of no wonder that it ended up so well. When you were working on Nave, was there anything in particular that really surprised you?
In terms of what?
Just in terms of development, was there any part of the development that maybe you didn't expect, or maybe was easier or harder than you expected?
Well, the biggest problems what I had was the graphics, because you know, Nave still runs on iPad generation 2. Not on the first generation, but starting from the second generation. And the the way the graphics are done, Axel did, it's the big maps inside, and we are just using all the RAM for bitmaps. That pushes the iPad to its limits. Not on a recent Air 2, let's say, but on an iPad 2 or an iPad 3, this gets critical. So that was the biggest problem we had in development and also support.
So there was a lot of optimization that you had to do as far as the engine on that?
Yeah, the graphics needed a lot of optimizations and tricks.
Did you did you find that that it impacted the voicing at all? Did you struggle between how much DSP you were providing towards the synth voice versus the graphics?
No, there was no, because the synth voice is just CPU performance, and the RAM needed for the wavetables compared to the graphics is neglectable. So the problem with the graphics was not CPU, because the graphics are running on the GPU, and it's just RAM. It's just memory,
Well,
which was the problem with the graphics.
I gotta say, you guys did an amazing job there, because I started with an iPad 3 with Nave on it, and I recently updated to an iPad Air, the first generation, and the only difference I realized is that the intro is loading a little faster. But besides that, performance is on the iPad 3 was just as good than on the iPad Air 1. So that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, I have an iPad 3 and I'm running Nave, and I would say the same. It runs great. It runs great.
I run mine on an iPad 4 and no problems here. I run it along with a few other things in chains. I'm a big fan of, I'll probably pronounce it wrong, but I want to say it's Kymatic. They do like dub effects and those different effects. I use those all the time in conjunction with Nave, and just sounds fantastic. I mean, as a sound module, you have to be excited by an iPad. I mean, if you're into, you know, taking your synthesis to go, or if, you know, because to have something like Nave or Nlog in a form factor like this, when we used to have to buy expensive racks that were bulky, and you know, you couldn't take them with you. They didn't have a fun interface, and you would not have knobs to play with. Whereas on this, you can design whatever knobs you want. You can load up a different keyboard if you want to use a lemur or something, and then combine it with Nave or Nlog. You can do that, you know. So the fact that we even have this alone is impressive. And then when you hear the sound quality of this compared to the sound quality of many VSTs that are out today, it stands on its own side by side any VST on any computer.
Oh, definitely. And that's something I wanted to ask Rolf about as well, because I use, I mean, I have probably every major iOS app as far as synthesizers go, and I use the Alesis IO dock, and to me, it's just as good as having, you know, VSTs or anything like that. And I wanted to kind of ask you about that. How do you feel about? I mean, I know a lot of people use iPad synthesizers, you know, strictly. They really produce in iOS, and they're making great music. Is that something that, as far as you as a developer, do you see the potential there, and do you plan on doing more as far as synthesizers, or how do you see that whole space as far as the VST versus the iPad and such?
Yeah, that's a good question, because you know, there was a lot of in the beginning, not so much recently, but in the beginning there was a big discussion. Well, people say, oh, there's no good audio synthesis possible on iOS devices. If you remember this, a few years ago, and you cannot make synthesizers good on an iPad, you know, and they will never sound as good as VSTs. So I think, not consciously, but somehow Nave was also the idea to prove them wrong, right? Mm-hmm. And it's good to hear that you like them so much. So I think there's a lot of potential, but I don't think for me, it's, since I'm now also doing the Nave for VST and audio unit, so I think both have the right in their own way, but producing on an iPad is much different than producing with a mouse in the DAW, and having a second alternative, or how you would say, you can also combine the both ways. It's an enrichment, and producers and musicians can now choose which way they want to go.
Mm-hmm.
There's no right and wrong. I mean, I'm doing iPad stuff, but this does not mean that the DAW is wrong. We still need DAWs, and still there are good VSTs out there. So we need both, and to have both ways, fantastic. And I see good potential. The problems I see on the iPad right now is not technically, because the CPUs now on the iPads are so super fast that anything is possible. The problem more is that prices have gone down, so, and there's lots of competition there. So taking 1.5 years for an iOS app is a long time.
Yes, I can imagine. Yeah.
Because somehow you have to finance this, and most of the iOS apps which are coming out have been developed in 3 or 6 months or something like this.
Okay.
I would assume.
Well, where I got a question, because every time I talk with guys about iOS apps and how great they are, there's one question coming up sooner or later, and this is, why do I have to pay such a big amount of money for a VST plugin, where now iPad apps have such a good sound, and I can have an app for about maybe $10 or $15, or let's say even I think one of the most important apps I have is the Core Gadget, which is €40 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So in my personal opinion, and I want to ask you if I'm right at this point, is that if people start developing VST plugins, the VST plugins pay also the iOS development in kind of way. Is that right, or what do you?
I think that's a good question, but there's several aspects to answer it. First, I would say when we brought out Nave, and I think it was 1999 or something in the beginning.
Yeah, it was, yep.
Yeah. And there were some commenters, are you crazy to bring out such a great synthesizer for 1999? Are you stupid? People wrote in sites like Synthopia or whatever. And so on iOS, certainly the prices are lower with the idea that more people buying stuff. So this could be two factors. One factor is people. I have some friends who said, I was making 10 years ago music with a keyboard, but they forgot about it. And with an iPad, they said, oh, I can now buy a synth for 10 or 20 bucks. Oh, let's try that. I'm making music again. And then they start to buy a MIDI keyboard, a master keyboard, and connect this via an interface. So and they would never bought a VST for $150.
Mm-hmm.
So and would you also find that you guys are dealing with a lot less piracy issues being on the iOS platform?
Yes, because in order to pirate an iOS app, you would have to jailbreak your device.
Right.
This is something the normal user is not doing. It's not like installing a cracked VST on your computer. It's a fundamental change. You would fundamentally change your iPad.
Right.
To jailbreak it.
Yeah.
And I don't know, but I have no figures what's the rate for one sword VST comes to 10. I don't know how many pirate VST comes to one sword, but on iPads it's the other way around.
That's good. That's a good thing.
Yeah, that's a good thing, and that has something to do with the price point as well.
Right. And so for you as a developer, you mentioned earlier that as a user, both platforms benefit the end user, the VST as well as the app. So as a developer, I imagine you feel the same way. You'd prefer to develop VST and the app both together to give the users the options they need, and that benefits you in the long run financially, because you have both sources of both as resources coming in. Is that correct, or is the iPad more appealing to develop for from a financial standpoint, or is it both?
Oh, that's a good question. Ask me in half a year when the Nave VST is out. Then I can.
Gotcha.
Yeah. I mean, and that's all very valid, because I think that's something that everybody who releases any kind of software or sounds is struggling with. I mean, piracy is a common topic, but when we see things like $20 iOS apps, that's great. But on the flip side of what you were saying about people arguing about it being too low, you get people who say, "Oh, what do you mean you're coming out with a $20 or $30 iOS app? That's so high, it should be 99 cents." And you're like, "Wait a second."
Yeah.
I can understand people now. Let's say I don't know how much the Nave VST version is coming out, but I think that argument is coming on again. So they say, why do I have to pay? And I guess it's more than $20 on the iPad app. And then people say, why do I have to pay more than for the iPad app where all the work is done? They only have to port it to the computer versions. And I can understand these people, but
yeah, that's a good point. But what people do not understand and maybe not believe, but it's easy to say, I'm working on the VST version for a year.
Yeah,
so it's not just, it's not just porting it from iOS. There are apps which are ported from iOS one-to-one to a VST, and they're not good VSTs in that moment, because an iOS app it's a touch-based app. So the Nave app, the Nave VST looks different. And has even a little bit different. It's still Nave, right? But even the audio engine has been a little bit very subtle tuned to the DAW environment. And I said already in some other podcasts, and people do not believe, but I cannot prove it unless they come to my PC. It's about 90% rewrite.
Oh, wow.
Only 10% of the lines of code I could copy and paste. The rest is new. The graphics are new, the code is new, so it's because we want to do the same thing. We wanted to do the best possible Nave thing as a VST, and not just a copy and paste of the iPad version.
I think for a sound that's garnered so much positive attention, I think it would be insane to do anything less, because you have such a quality name now with not just Waldorf, but the Nave name.
Yeah.
When people say Nave, they think, oh, that is a great synth.
Totally.
So if you were to half-ass it in any way, I think that would be a terrible idea.
Yeah, get some quick cash in. That's not what it is.
Yeah. And I think we all appreciate that for sure. I want to also ask you about some of the other products you've been involved in. You have a harpsichord app as well. Can you tell us a little bit about how that came about?
Yeah, that's a funny story. The idea is already 3-4 years old, and aside to be a big fan of analog synthesizers, I'm also a big fan of old harpsichords, because these were the synthesizers of the 17th and 18th century. And there's a guy in Germany who sampled meticulously old harpsichords in museums and private collections. Really the Stradivari of the best instruments. So he did some sample libraries for Contact and other sample player, and we got in touch, and we just thought, well, why not do an iPad app with that? And since this is just some kind of not mainstream thing, I just put it aside a little bit. But after Nave was done and I did the Arturia ISAM part, then I said, okay, let's finish that. So that's how it came, and yeah, it's the most expensive harpsichord app in the iOS store, and is
I want to say it's $30 US, $29.99.
yeah,
Right.
I'm not making money with it, but you know the instrument he sampled is $1 million worth,
Wow.
or €1 million even. It just has
Yeah, that's a good bit higher than.
yeah,
That's like 1.6 million. So.
Wow.
it's a collector's item and just changed the private owner from one private owner to another private owner just recently.
Now, I hope that private owner has a synth collection. I'm sure he scoffs at the new Moog modulars.
Yeah, he bought the complete, you know.
Oh goodness. So when working on that, now that's mostly just a strictly sample playback engine, or what do you have DSP-wise going on inside of that?
Well, this is a sample engine, which has been for sure tuned a little bit to the instrument, and but there's nothing spectacular in terms of DSP going on. It's not spectacular, but the more creative work was to model the playing techniques of these instruments for an iPad app, and so I worked with a real professional harpsichord player, and he tried it, and we tried to tune and to how you say calibrate the release noises and
Wow.
stuff like this, that these people are happy.
That's very interesting, because you really do not see detailed harpsichord libraries out there these days. I mean, that's not something that I can say that in recent times that I've seen anybody really do. But for an iOS app to do something so detailed, I mean, that's. Do you have an idea of exactly like how many samples were used, and you know how articulate it is?
I don't know the number, but we have about 800 megabytes sample content used. The original library has, I think, 4 gigabyte, but there are some limits. You know, I don't want it to waste 4 gigabyte on a device, because if the user has an 8 gigabyte or 16 gigabyte device, then it's almost full already with one harpsichord. But on the other hand, I wanted to have the most quality, so basically there are not too many multi-samples there, sometimes here and there, and yeah. The other thing what we did, we had some historic tunings inside as well. So you can experiment with this kind of strange mean tone and other tuning systems.
Like 432 and alternate. You mean like alternate classical tunings, or?
Yes.
Oh, interesting.
This is interesting because, and I was joking around on Twitter some time ago. If you these kind of tunings based on the facts, for example, that the thirds on the normal tuning you're using right now, which these thirds are not perfect. But if you listen to some, especially analog sounds, which has the second oscillator tuned as a third, as a major third, then the third is perfectly tuned by your ears, typically.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this is used in some EDM music as well, and you can listen to that very specific sound, especially if you have some sawtooth oscillators. And so I was joking around, this music really should consider these kind of old mean tone-like tunings which favor the third to make them perfect. because they don't modulate anyhow. If it's a C major techno EDM piece, it's C major. You know, you need the modern tunings only if you modulate, like in jazz or classical music, quickly from C to E flat to F sharp, etc., etc. So this is a little bit esoteric, but it would be interesting to make some EDM based on the tunings.
Yeah, and I think that there's I get scared to go down the Alex Jones conspiracy theorist route of all these tunings, because you see that stuff come up a lot where people start talking about these older tunings and how tuning has changed over history, and you know, some people get into the mind control aspects of it. And I personally don't feed into that.
Really?
I think that stuff is wonderful if you're an X-Files watcher. But I will say that it is really interesting when you think about in terms of a harpsichord, because you know, these are instruments that, or I mean, let's be honest, the harpsichord is not a major instrument in today's society, but in I'm going to use the term loosely, in ancient society, when you know, pre-piano, I mean, that was the instrument. So it's you know, and when we think about that, you know, the tunings of old, they would have been in that tuning. So I would assume that some of the sample library would have been done in some of those other tunings, or is it pitched, or how are you coming about the alternate tunings?
Yeah, so that was this is a thing the iOS does, but not the sample library, because what I did is I analyzed each sample for the exact frequency, such that the sample engine can transpose the sample to the right tuning.
Oh, okay. So you're doing it on a per sample basis.
Per sample basis. You know, typically if you sample an instrument, normal keyboard or whatever, you know, and you make your key mapping just based on MIDI pitches, 60, 61, blah blah blah, and I made it on frequencies in hertz.
Oh, okay. So that's much more accurate.
Yes. And so I used some algorithms to automatically detect these tunings, and then I checked each sample again manually, and yeah, so that's an interesting stuff. So my idea is, because you mentioned that before, you are interested, or you like the idea to have analog and digital hybrid synths.
Yes, yeah.
So there was always the idea I had to make a synth which mixes virtual analog with samples.
Oh yeah, okay. So you're talking about like sample-based oscillators?
Yeah, not only oscillators, also full samples. You know.
Oh, okay.
You have you could do something like the evolver, where you have wavetable-like sample-based oscillators, but you could also just play complete samples, run it through a filter in combination with a virtual analog and oscillator.
Absolutely.
And I don't know if this is somewhere already done in that way. I think you're muted, or I don't hear you.
Yeah, you're right. Thank you. For analog synthesis, yeah, that becomes much harder to come by. It's in idea similar to something like Omnisphere, which would be, you know, you can do sample-based synthesis combined with DSP oscillators, but then, you know, we would want the analog drive and analog filter, you know, because me personally, many digital filters these days are getting much closer, but you do still hear a timbre difference between them. One that I would bring up, though, that that I really like the filter sound on is the Arturia iSem, and
Right.
And you had worked on that as well. What was your involvement on the iSem?
The ISAM is in contrast to Nave was just the one-to-one part of the plugin.
Mm-hmm.
The UI is a little bit different, but I just got the code from the plugin and worked with the graphical designer to make an iPad version for it. So there's no, I haven't touched the DSP in any way there. But I agree, the filter is great.
Yeah, I will say that the filter on that is far improved compared to their older library of stuff. Like if you compare the filter on that to the filter on Modular V, or even their Mini V, it's, in my opinion, is night and day difference. Like you can really, and even though they're different design principles of filter, the actual, like when you hear resonance sweep, there's on an analog filter, it's a very, it's what really kind of grabs you and gets you excited. You know, like when I am playing with the filters on my Moog, or I have a SEM module in my Eurorack, and when I let that frequency go up and the resonance go up, and then I sweep it down, the way the resonance will growl is very difficult to emulate properly in digital.
Yeah, that's what kind of makes or breaks the a digital synth.
Yeah, and for me, like oscillators are digital oscillators are really cool because you can do a lot of very powerful things with a digital oscillator set. So you can do extremely powerful FM. You can do through zero without any kind of problem. You know, like it's just much easier. But I feel like you can emulate some of the liveliness of an analog oscillator a little bit easier than you can emulate the way a resonance breaks up and moves across a spectrum on an analog filter. Do you say like you tuned N-Log by ear? Is that a big reason as to why you did that? Is it?
Exactly, fully agreed. That's the idea. How there's one question, one aspect is the resonance, and the other aspect is how the cutoff behaves over when you turn the dial in constant speed, because that's never uniform.
Yeah, it's not
good sounding. It's you bend it, you warp it in some kind of strange way.
Yeah, and that's probably my favorite aspect on any given synth. And what we were talking about before the show about hybrid synthesis, especially, is using wavetables through an analog oscillator. I mean, with a wavetable oscillator, you get some really wild timbres and complex shapes that are extremely difficult to emulate with an analog oscillator. So when you kind of combine the two, you really get best of both worlds. Which brings me to another question, which is Eurorack and so Waldorf is doing the NW1, the Nave oscillator is basically what we can look at it at, Nave wavetables. When you first found out about that, what was your thinking? Like, what was your thought process on that? Is that something that interests you greatly, or?
I mean, I'm of course I'm a little bit proud to see Nave in at least a little bit of Nave in the Eurorack, right? So that's nice. On the other hand, well, I used to plug in my iPad to my new Eurorack, so I had already my Nave in it. So
As
I'm
I
not
do, yeah.
So I like it, but it's not that I would bought it immediately.
I think on top of that, so I'm gonna watch this segue because this segue is gonna be so sexy. You're just gonna love it. Okay. So I love to plug Nave into my Eurorack, and a way that I do that is I use the Animodule Tranimodule, which will boost my my iPad into synth signal. But you've actually done a Eurorack module, and it is extremely high quality VCA that allows you to boost a headphone output to a synth signal. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how it came about?
Yeah, so I was working on a larger module which is digital based, and so I was faced the problem to get the output of the digital to analog converter to the very high Eurorack level. So I was researching chips which could do this in a very good way, because the output of the digital to analog converter is even below line level, and a Eurorack level is much higher than line level. So I found the best chips out there used in the highest quality devices is from a company called That Audio. So I built that, and it was so useful that I just made a module just out of the final stage of my bigger module, which is just an VCA which can amplify up to 24 dB, which is what you need roughly when you want to amplify line level or even iPad headphone output to Eurorack. And when I did this, I looked into the market, and still there is no VCA which amplifies. All VCAs are just, I mean, it's called voltage controlled amplifier, but they're not amplifying anything. They are voltage controlled attenuators, right? They do not amplify. Maybe here and there 1 or 2 dB gain, but normally the VCAs have no gain at all. There are gain modules out there, but they are not voltage controllable. For example, Depfa, I think, has a gain module with a switch, I think it has 4 or 6 or 12 dB gain or something like this. So I was somehow also excited to use not only these Gainsberg module as an audio interface, but also to have gain within a normal Eurorack patch. For example, there's some crazy stuff you can do. You can do if you take a bandpass filter without resonance, patch it into my gain module, and feed it back to the input of the bandpass, then you can get a resonance.
Ah, nice.
And then you can, within the resonance pass, you start to do effects. If you then modify the feedback pass with delays, with other filters, with whatever you have in your Eurorack, you can do some really crazy stuff.
Yeah,
so I found it useful not only as an interfacing thing, but also within the modular context itself.
Yeah, that sounds like a fantastic module as well. I mean, with no no compromise in audio quality, which is important. I mean, the way that I tend to look at modular is no compromises. That's because otherwise, what's the point? I mean, it's modular because you can have the best of every single piece. So why skimp and go weak on anything, really?
Yeah.
So I think that's very, very interesting and very useful as well, because whereas the Tranimodule is great because it will do a similar process in boosting line level to synth level. It's designed inherently as a distortion, and a very nice one, but it's kind of the polar opposite. It's where I can use it has a speaker built into it, a small speaker,
okay.
And you can actually drive the speaker and take the output of the load of the speaker and use that as a distortion, which is wonderful. But this one is on the flip side, where if I want to have that perfectly crisp sound coming through and use it at synth level, that's really powerful. One question I do have about that, because I was trying to look at the spec sheet and I didn't see it. The outputs on that, are they AC coupled or is it DC or? Like, can you pass like a digital LFO through it, or how would that?
Yes, so the inputs you can use DC and AC inputs. So the big jacks are AC coupled because that's what you typically get from a line level,
Yep.
Sure.
and you interface from different. Also, there's a mini jack stereo in the middle of the lower row. This is also AC coupled, but the other mini jack inputs are DC coupled. So you could feed an envelope or an LFO into it.
Okay, very cool.
I'm
So, yeah,
I'm posting the link to the Gainsberg Eurorack module in our the Producers Hangout Facebook group. We have a chat running in there where people are talking about it. And just to give you a heads up, Red Walk says basically that basically the wavetable is dead and long live the Nave table, and I agree.
Right.
So you've also worked on another Eurorack-minded idea, which would be the ZDSP platform. Now that is kind of I don't want to say polar opposite, but it runs at a lower frequency. What have you done on that platform?
Oh, you know, from Tip Top Audio, you have this DSP, which is a strange DSP chip, but you can somehow program it with cards, with little memory cards. And the problem was that from Tip Top Audio, I think there are only 2 different cards out there.
Yeah,
so
I know that they have the Halls of Valhalla, and they have the BAT filter.
Yeah, and the delay card.
Yeah.
And the Halls of Valhalla is just recently.
Yeah.
It came to the market, and I think I was somehow the first third-party vendor doing a card for that module. And this is already, I don't know, 2 years ago or something like this.
Now,
And
did you contact them first, or did you just see that you could do it and you just decided to jump in and do it?
well, I contacted them as well, and they gave me good support, so they're nice guys from there. Because the cards, in the beginning they produced the cards and I programmed them, and now I'm producing these cards myself, or with a local factory here.
Nice. And can you say, so this is the broken silicone card, and can you tell us a little bit about it, about what it does?
Yes, these cards has always 8 effects on it. So, and some cards like the Valhalla has 8 variations of something like reverb, or the BAT filter has 8 variations of reverb, of a filter.
Mm-hmm.
So, but for my card, was the idea is not to make 8 variations, but to have 8 distinct effects. So I did a comb filter, or a dual comb filter, which rings very nicely. So the people, this is somehow the most favorite effect on that card. I did a bit crusher.
Nice.
Which also could change the sample rate in a very harsh way. I made a distortion, digital distortion. I made, which is very, I made a wave shaper. And a very funny thing is kind of a digital sync generator. So you know the typical sync effect
Yes.
between 2 analog oscillator, and here you feed in a sawtooth wave, and then the DSP card makes the sync effect in a little bit more digital harsh way. So this is my favorite, for example. I made an 8-voice sine generator, and what's the last one? The last one is you trigger this with one gate, and it produced a burst of gates on the outputs.
Oh, okay. So the going back to the sync on that, have you used trying to think of some digital synths that use something similar. The Ultranova has a V-Sync on it, something similar to that, which it's a virtual sync basically, but I think that might be somewhat similar to what you're referring to. I don't have that module yet, so I'm gonna have to get one.
Yeah.
I treat modules like that, like Pokemon cards. I gotta collect them all.
Yeah.
So,
expensive hobby.
well, with that platform, so that platform runs. I want to say it's like 32 megahertz or something like that, or 32 kilohertz. It's a slower rate on there. Is that one of the reasons why you went for like the harsh route of doing like the bit crushing and or did you just want something that was just like a really big breakup distortion?
Well, I at the time, or 2 years ago, you know, when I did this, there weren't so many digital effect modules available in the Eurorack market, which is nowadays totally different. You know, you now have from Chris Randall, you know, a lot of his VST plugins as a kind of effect. You have from Make Noise digital stuff working with Tom Irby and many other vendors. But 2 years ago there were already some digital stuff, but not so many. And I wanted to have a bit crusher in an analog context, and there were not. I'm not sure if there was any available. So I said, oh, let's do it with this module and stuff.
Yeah, I think maybe at that time, I'm trying to think as to whether or not even the Malgorithm was there at that time, because that would have been probably the only other one.
Maybe it was there at that time.
Yeah, so that's pretty few and far between at that point for such a, considering how many other modules there are out there. I mean, that's pretty interesting. Do you have any desire to continue doing Eurorack platform stuff, be it either coding for DSP platforms or be it for making analog circuits, or
making hardware modules? Not only these cards, but making more modules. But it's a matter of time. I'm a single guy, you know, and doing software and hardware is very hard.
Sure.
And maybe if the Nave plugin is out, I find a little bit of extra time to do another module.
Do you have a preference as far as what you enjoy more, like as far as building hardware or building software, or is it just the fact of creation alone, or how does that work for you?
I love to create, be it hardware or software, and the process of creation with hardware and software is totally different. So I like both, and sometimes the enjoyment is being able to change. You know, after half a year or year of intensive software development, I enjoy to do hardware.
Yeah, I can see that as a nice break. Yeah. So not to press the issue, because that's that's not what I want to do. But if like, and we're talking theoretically, we're just spitballing here. But if you were to develop a Eurorack module now, would you rather it be a DSP-based Eurorack module, or would you rather it be an analog hardware-based module?
Right now, probably analog, for the simple reason that the market is now flooded with digital stuff,
right?
And where there is lots of things and inventions happening. So I think I fear a little bit that all the new things in the Eurorack, there's not so much new things in the analog domain, the pure analog domain.
So did you follow NAMM this year and some of the modules and gear that was coming out at NAMM this year?
A little bit, yes.
I would say so. There was a couple of different schools of thought of things that were coming out. We saw so Roland had their analog / digital hybrid
Yeah.
that was announced, and that was pretty cool. And of course they have the XA coming at Music Messa, which looks very interesting. Um, in the Eurorack module world, the two that stood out to me was Sam Botstein's Emperor, I believe it's called, which was basically it's like an Intel i5 computer in a Eurorack with an interface for Eurorack built right into it, which looked really interesting. And then the polar opposite of that was Hex Inverter did the Mutant Machine, which is a module that you would almost swear is digital because it's so versatile, but it's actually analog, and it's an analog drum machine with a scannable oscillator and really interesting things. So it seems like I would agree with you that right now we're seeing Mutable Instruments is putting out a ton of DSP-based modules, and they all look fantastic. And then you've got Audio Damage, they did a whole line of, they did like the Averb and the Error Box and all that stuff that was all on the same platform. We see a lot of Arduino platforms coming out. Does the Arduino stuff, does that stuff strike your heart at all? Have you ever considered doing like maybe like a standalone Arduino box or anything in that realm? Or would you rather stay more towards like C-Sound and more deep line, hardware coding, or does it matter to you?
It's interesting that you mentioned this Intel platform as a module. My digital prototype, what I have for about a year or two, is a Linux computer as a module, where I'm
completely open.
It would be completely open, and it could even run normal C++ DSP code, and could run, I have even analog running on it, and so it could run anything. And it's not exactly what's Raspberry Pi.
Sure.
But it's something similar. It's called the BeagleBone I used.
Yes, I'm familiar with BeagleBone.
And so I made a module for the BeagleBone, and which just piggybacks the BeagleBone, but now with the Raspberry Pi 2, which is basically an old iPhone 4 or 3G from the DSP capabilities. That's also interesting.
So, does that feel in any way of a step back to you, as far as like if you're going to code on something like that when you've been used to coding iOS platforms so heavily? Like you went from the 3G platform, and then you've now things have opened up, and the world is so much prettier, and you can use these iPad 4s and whatnot. Does it feel almost like you're stepping backwards when you're doing that? And are you doing these test platforms more as just for fun and in your spare time? Do you still do it as a fun thing, I mean? Or is it, okay, this is what I'm doing when I'm working, and when I'm not working, I don't want to see a computer, I don't want to dive into any of this synthesis?
No, this prototype is part of my work time. And but now I would focus more on analog modules, as I said before, because there's too much digital stuff already going on, and I'm seeing a lack of innovation in the analog world. And so I see a risk with Eurorack explosion that we are getting a hardware version of a DAW, with just many plugins. And it's very easy to port somehow more and more digital. You know what was Audio Damage did? I mean, I like this guy. He's a great guy, and the plugins are very great. But he just once did the hardware platform, and now he could do all his 20 plugins in 20 modules. You know, and look at the pace how Mutable Instruments brings out modules.
Sure.
This is very this I'm not sure if this is healthy. On the other hand, devising a new innovative analog circuit, that's a hard thing.
Yeah,
Right.
You don't do this in 5 minutes.
Right, I would agree with that because I saw some of the Audio Damage modules at NAMM, and you know they're great if you need a that module, but it's really like almost like an exact ripping it out of the PC, kind of throwing it into a module kind of thing. It really doesn't have, and they're great. You know, I'm not trying to belittle his modules, but it's there's not a whole lot of life there, if you
Yes.
will, and I don't want to be too hard on him, but yeah, I hear what you're saying. A new analog circuit is something much more difficult to design and do and bring forth. So yeah.
I'm on the mindset of I kind of like both schools of thought. So I like the idea of everything that's digital can be put into the. I love that it's kind of new to us all that we can now have computers that are palm-sized, that are as powerful as what large studio computers were before. I mean, we've got computers that can literally fit in our hand that are more powerful than what were running the original versions of Cubase, you know?
Yeah.
So I think that on one side I'm like, you know what, I totally am all for, keep pumping these things out, but if you're going to be doing that, I almost want to see, I want to see the user interface of the modules improve. So if you're going to use the same platform for 10 different effects and they could all be run on the same Eurorack module, I want to see the faceplates be able to change and let me just download whatever code I want into them, something along those lines.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'm thoroughly all about how far can we push analog? What new things can we do with analog? And that's also where iOS stuff comes in, because I look at it the same way. I'm like, so now we can do I'm not super big on multitasking on iOS, but I really like a great dedicated piece on there. So I'll run Nave and maybe a couple of effects, but I'm not really big on running audio bus and 15 things at once, whereas some guys like doing that. That's not my workflow.
Yeah.
I use this as a sound module in the studio. So right now, I can play Nave as if it's any one of my other synthesizers, and that's wonderful. But that's the great thing about it, is that we have choice. The only thing that's really limiting us is two things: cash flow and Eurorack space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But on that note, I really want to say thank you to Rolf for coming on the show. It's really an honor to get to talk to you and meet you and dive into your brain a little bit about this stuff, because I'm a huge fan, and using this stuff daily gives me a ton of pleasure, and you should be extremely proud about what you've accomplished.
Definitely.
Yeah,
I agree. Yeah.
So I'm going to let me pass off to let me actually just say to Rolf first, if there's anything that you'd like to plug or let everybody know that you're working on now or not, or if you just want to plug what's out there currently, just let us know where we can find you and all that good jazz.
So first, great thank you for having me here. It's a great show. I like it, and was a great fun to talk with you all guys. And yeah, I'm currently just deep in the Nave plugin. And I think you will be astonished, because it's Nave, but it's Nave as a plugin, and we talked about filters and how difficult filters are. The filter of the plugin is very subtly different than in the iPad. So I'm very excited to hear when you have it, how you like it or not.
Can't wait.
yeah, that will be a great fun to see. So and I'm happy when this baby is out, and then my mind is free for other stuff, whatever that will be.
Well, I also hope that when when Nave is released, I'm hoping that we can get you back on the show, and we're going to talk a little bit more about it at that point as well, because we can dive into some of the challenges that came up during that, and also some of the changes and all, and and then what you've got coming on next after that as well, because I know you're a busy man. So, and now let me pass off to Upright. And why don't you tell us what you've been working on, because you're not on Facebook and everybody keeps asking about you.
Just been doing stuff with Cold Busted Records, doing releases with them, and just playing around with synths. I'm trying to figure out what my next Euro rack module is. I just bought Omnisphere, and I can't believe it took me so long to get that. And that I always looked at it as like a sound designer's tool or like something for movies, but it's a real synth from the ground up, and it's so powerful. So I finally got that, and other than that, man, just nothing much. Just hanging out, playing around with synths, having fun with the family. So,
all right,
good show. And Rolf, nice meeting you. I'm a big fan of your work, and it was a pleasure to talk with you and see some of the background and everything that went into Nave. So thanks for coming on the show today.
And Mike from Pad Bangers, Silent Cypher.
Yeah. First of all, thanks to Rolf. Thanks for coming by. Really great. I'm really looking forward to get my hands on Nave for the computer, because also my favorite iPad app. Besides that, new reviews coming up in about 30 minutes, so make sure you check out padbangers.com. Also, I want to remind you guys that my free template for the machine is still available for free download, and it turns your machine from a studio controller into a nice little live instrument, just like a TR-8. So if you not already have, go check it out. It's free. Play around with it, improve it, and have fun with it. Yeah, so that's it for me. Peace out. Hope to see you guys next time.
Okay, and I'm just going to touch on that real quick. I'd really, really advise people go to padbangers.com and get that template, because it really is a blast to play with. So if you do you, let me ask real quick, do you have that available for MK2 users also, or is it only Studio?
No, it should work even on the MK1.
Oh yeah, you're absolutely right. That's right. Yeah, I was forgetting for a second how it was laid out. Yeah, so it'll work on MK1, MK2, and Studio, and basically it loads the drum synths all across it, and so that you can easily just punch in and use it as a step sequencer drum machine, and it makes the machine a blast to work with if you're the kind of person who likes to jam with hardware and do that step sequencing thing and just kind of go to town with all your hardware gear. It really makes like buying something like a TR-8 kind of like pointless because it's done so well. So I got to thank you for taking the time to do that, because I've been having a lot of fun with it. That along with a little bit of the grain stretch for glitching. So that's just like having the scatter function. So it's really fun. So I gotta say thanks for that.
And that was the goal. Actually, a friend of mine came to me and said, I want to buy a TR-8, not because he liked the sound, but he likes the handling. And I was like, dude, you got a machine on stage. We need to figure something out that works just the same. And from what I've heard from people so far, it worked. So I'm glad you guys like it.
Money is the mother of invention. So, on my side, I'll just say that I'm very far behind on a bunch of videos that I'm supposed to be posting up. I've been very busy with the baby and with the family. But part 5 or 6, whichever one I'm on, of the DIY effects product that we're building together on my website, that will be up soon. And I'll post part 7 of that, which is the completion of it, directly after, because as you can see, it's already done. So we'll have that up soon, and come check out the Producers Hangout Facebook group. We've got lots of cool stuff going on there, and thanks for listening. Peace.
Oh, one more thing.
Oh, one last thing.
Yeah, we're now available as a podcast on iTunes, Podbean, and Stitcher. So if you're not able to watch the show and you want to listen to it as a podcast on your way to your work or whatever, wherever it is, you can now subscribe to it on iTunes, Podbean, and Stitcher.
That's right. And some of the earlier episodes on Stitcher are not quite right. Don't worry about it. We're getting that sorted. It'll be finished by the end of the week. But on iTunes and everything else, everything's great. So go check it out over there. And thank you to everybody for watching and being on the show today. And have a great week.